Hello, it is our pleasure to have Elena Leontjeva with us. She's the president and co-founder of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute. She's heralded as one of the people who impulsed very important economic free market reforms in Lithuania, pension reform on capital markets, as well as tax reform, and probably many other reforms. She also told us that she was understanding Austrian economics before she even knew it was called Austrian economics, and we have the honor to give Elena this weekend an honorary doctorate from UFM for all her work advancing the principles of liberty and of a free society in Lithuania and the rest of the world. So we're very glad to have us with us, Elena. Welcome to UFM.
Thank you.
What is your impression of UFM and Guatemala so far?
Oh, I love UFM, and first time when Giancarlo Ibergen told me about the conception of UFM before I met some people here, before I visited, I already fell in love with UFM and the idea that you teach economic principles, free market principles in every faculty was deep in my heart.
Great. So you've been visiting UFM for many years already. And just to get our audience a little bit on track, many people probably on this side of the ocean do not know Lithuania. After independence from the Soviet Union, can you give a little bit of like historical context? Like where were you yourself at the time? What was the country like at the time? And how did you get to free market thought in a post-communist country?
So we in Lithuania were awaiting independence, we were fighting for independence, and actually the fall of the Soviet Union started in my country. We were the first to declare independence, to declare return to private property, to free market, and people were really enthusiastic about that. So it was the context of the reforms, and I was just a young doctoral student at that time. And when we found the Lithuanian Free Market Institute, I understood that it is a time to really make the changes, not to think about the changes, not to write about the changes, but to make those changes in the country so that people have possibility to act freely, to produce, to exchange. For all of these things, of course, we needed certain institutions, certain we had to change the laws because the laws of the Soviet Union were still acting. So if we did not change the tax law, it would be the old tax code. If we do not introduce national currency, we would have still the Soviet currency. So, we had to start all the basic institutions of a free market society from scratch. And I remember my professor and the founder of the Lithuanian Free Market Institute, before independence was declared, he would come to the library where we all were working on our dissertations, and he would say, "Oh, but when we will become independent, we will need to have our own currency. Think it over. We will have to have our own tax system. Consider what the tax system we will have." So the ideas were already circulating. And when the time came, we started from building a background for credit system, for capital market, because of course the economy starts with the capital flow, and we had to privatize our banking system. The Free Market Institute prepared draft legislation on capital market and stock exchange. So already in 1993 we had operating stock exchange. And all people became shareholders through the mass privatization because everyone was given his voucher and people could buy shares in the enterprises. But those shares, where would you trade them? There were no disclosure rules, nothing. So we had actually to build everything. And probably the biggest breakthrough was going to the sound currency when we from the Free Market Institute suggested that we need a currency board model to safeguard our currency from any political interventions. And the former communists who were in power at that time, they believed in this idea And we drafted the Litas credibility law. A lot has been done by my own head. And when it was enacted, I remember how I trembled because all the promises which were given to the people publicly, like that currency will become freely convertible just in one day. Would it happen? The interest rates will go down. Will it happen? So, of course, I was trembling, but the reality was even better than the promise. The interest rates went like from 80 or almost 100% to 18% just in few months.
Right.
Currency became completely convertible. So there was no restriction. You can exchange as many dollars to litas or as many litas to dollars. Just in one day, everything happened. And I think the sound currency was really the starting point of a really free market economy.
The foundation, a stable currency, no capital controls. Let's talk a little bit about that afterwards, but you talked about the privatization as well. So you've mentioned outside this room and outside this interview that when you are talking about privatization, the speed is more important than the details. Can you respond to that? Or?
Yes, my teacher, philosopher, when we had discussions about privatization, which model to use and so on, he would always say, you know, the most important thing is the speed, because there is no perfect way to go out of nationalized property. Every way would have their own shortfalls. So whatever way you choose, just go ahead boldly and rapidly. The capital will move from one hand to another hand until it is in the hands of people who can use it more efficiently. So there will be a lot of changes, he said. And what is very important, I think, when we speak about justice and equality, that every citizen was given a voucher which allowed to get shares from companies, or to buy your own apartment, or to buy a piece of land on which your house is. And it was very important because afterwards, when people said, look, someone became rich and I didn't, but you know, we were all given the same opportunity. And I think this is very important because the privatization is creating certain starting equality. And also it's very rapid because everyone is just issued those vouchers.
So that's different from the Russian privatization wave, which is more concentrated in some hands.
Yes.
And in Lithuania, it was broader to the entire population who participated in one way or another in the privatizations.
Yes, and in Russia also the main shortfalling was the so-called auctions. When you could buy the company but not really pay for it like you would pay in the future using this company. So I think that created some troubles in the future.
Bad incentives maybe.
Yes, but again, with the huge industries, you know, there is no perfect way to do it.
So talking about privatization, can you just explain to the audience, especially on this side of the ocean, the importance of private property rights? I think you mentioned you discovered the merits of private property even when you were still in a communist economy with state property of the means of production. Can you comment on the importance of private property rights?
Yes, in Soviet Union we had only state-owned property, which was considered to be no one's property. So when I first started to work in an enterprise, I was astonished because there was no systematic stealing from the no one's property, and everyone helped each other to steal, you know, from the owner. So it was very corrupted system, hugely corrupted system.
You gave an example of a confectionery.
Yes, right. My first job was in a confectionery, and so people on a lower level who could steal, you know, something which they can put in their pockets, in their purses, but the bosses, they could steal by truck.
Right.
So for me, the question was how this system should be changed so that people don't have to steal to make their living. And on the other hand, how the system should be changed so that the chocolates which we produce can be freely available in the stores. Because if I go to the store, I cannot buy those chocolates which we produce. Everything was in shortage, meat, chocolate, books, dresses, everything was in shortage. And you had to use connections like, relatives, friends, or special corrupted level of people who could connect you, whatever your need is, and you would get something paying some extra, like for furniture, for your room, you would have to pay. And it was almost the same amount in this whole Soviet Union. Like maybe in Lithuania, we would pay like, 50 rubles. In Siberia, they would pay maybe 40 or 60 rubles. So it was more or less, the same level of corruption. And also funny, we had to go to Moscow. My mother would take me there to visit theaters because of a elevated cultural life, but also we would use the visit to buy some shoes and so on. So the supply was concentrated just to several capitals. We in Lithuania still had much better supply. Also our food industry was of very good quality, so we still had good dairy, some meat, like some bones with some meat. Of course, you could not make a steak out of the meat which was sold in the Soviet Union, but we were not completely starving. But people in Siberia, they were completely starving, like, there was almost nothing. And it is, of course, for me, a very young student, like I was 15 when I started to work, and I was studying programming. And I started to care, so how the system should be organized so that all these systematic problems are removed and that people could produce freely, exchange, without paying extras, that we should not be stealing from no one's property. So when I started to study economics at the university and on my last year, I was writing my diploma. The topic was so-called self-independence of Soviet enterprises, because at that time already it was a move towards more or less market economy, and the illusion was that by giving enterprises some sovereignty, some independence, we can create kind of market between different entities.
An imitated market, a replicated market.
Yes, yes. And in former Yugoslavia, they had more or less this model, and it was producing more, sausages. It was called sausage socialism. Yeah.
It's a very interesting term. So you've talked then not just about the economic efficiency of private property. Maybe we can talk right now about your reform in Lithuania, especially with regards to the stock market, which is, of course, a capitalist institution that allows to assign resources to certain industries and certain businesses. But you've also talked about the corruption of the mind, and social corruption that is generated by this kind of, public property of the means of production.
Yes, because communists could not change the human nature, and we did not become angels. So we were still people who were taking care of their families, what the mother would serve kids in the evening for the dinner. So of course people were, trying to somehow manage. They became very smart. We have a lot of expressions pointing out to this smartness of people who have nothing and still they have to do their living. So it's a very special kind of capacities, and we still see the results. Those capacities which are in people, they do not vanish quickly, and we see that in the former Soviet republics.
Right. So talking about the privatization and then the stock market, as you said, well, we now have all these private businesses. Where can people buy and sell the shares of those businesses? And I think in 1993, the stock market was inaugurated in Lithuania. So how does it compare with other communist countries. Were you the first for having a stock market? And I think you mentioned a very nice anecdote about going abroad to Europe, and they were actually surprised that you already had a stock market at that point.
Yes, I think we were one of the first. Definitely we were ahead of Czech Republic, and Czech Republic is noticeable because they also had this mass voucher privatization a little bit ahead of Lithuania. But they didn't hurry to create a capital market and organize capital market and stock exchange. And we were hurrying, and as I said, people got opportunity to freely trade their shares, to also to get information about the companies that they own now, which is essential to, you know, to produce this capitalist mindset. And yes, when I visited Paris Stock Exchange, they asked how many stock exchanges did I visit, which model did we use in Lithuania, and I said, you know, this is my first stock exchange. So how could you create another one? And my response was, we were just thinking. So we were just thinking of the most basic rules of the game. And I think this is a very good approach to lawmaking. You just set up, you know, basic rules of the game without any interventionism, and allow people to become owners of shares. Also to give the companies possibility to raise capital on the market. My teacher and founder of the institute always said, we have to raise capital. You know, there is a need to raise capital. So, you know, raising capital and allocation of capital was, in my mind, you know, the very basis of a free market economy, which is not probably so intuitive to many people today, because all of those interventions, of course, they make capital flowing not the way it should flow. And of course, all the distortions, they just decrease the welfare.
I think it was Ludwig von Mises who once said, what's the difference between a socialist and a capitalist economy? And everybody was thinking of a different response, and he said a stock market. So it's very interesting. And then continue to the pension reform. How does it tie in with the whole capital markets, especially on this side of the ocean in Latin America? The typical pension system is not based on savings. It's based on actually taking pay-as-you-go, take money from people who are working right now and pay pensioners who are pensioning nowadays. So you never have any savings like behind the financing of pensions. So how does it tie in with the capital markets reform, with the private property, with post-communist society in Lithuania, and what was the reform about?
Yeah, already in 1994, when our currency became stable and sound, we understood that it is not enough just to privatize the industries, that the social system also has to be privatized. And we started to look for a model, how to allow people to start saving for their future pension privately. And we have designed, again, a piece of legislation which would allow people to pay less to the pay-as-you-go system and gradually increase their payment, of course, take tax-free payment into the saving system. And it took us, I think, almost 6 years to educate the public that it is possible. And many people would say, oh no, maybe it works in Chile, but it will not work here, and so on. But eventually, the law was approved, and we had, you know, first private pensions. The system is not perfect now because there were too many political compromises, and the gradual switch from pay-as-you-go to private system, it did not come to the mind of politicians. So they were like, you know, in every difficult situation, oh, let's take money from the pension funds. Right. Oh, why pension funds take money from pay-as-you-go system, you know? But the idea is that everyone has to save for their future. And of course, the pension funds are also a big source of capital. They invest both in Lithuania and abroad. And most important is diversify. And today, to save the system, we have to remind people that financial education is not just about your pocket, just about how to deal with today. Financial education is about how to plan your future. Time preference is essential. With a low time preference, people tend to consume everything they earn. The higher the time preference is, the more able people are to save for the future. And I found out very interesting studies saying that with the increase of time preference, people are less inclined to use drugs, to damage themselves. They are more likely to behave in an ethical way because they care about the future. So now we educate the public about the importance of time preference, not just for private savings, but in general for an ethical behavior on the market, for good relationship with yourself and with your neighbor. So time preference is very important, and of course, the more the culture of a society is advanced, the more this time preference open the horizon for the future.
Yes, not just about the savings in a financial, economic sense. It's also about maybe the psychological nature of people tapping into that system, and all the destructive behavior, which is probably linked to very short-term thinking and not so much long-term thinking.
Yes, and it's important, especially for a younger generation, to consider themselves, to have some aims for the future, like where do I want to be when I'm 40, when I'm 50, when I'm retired? What kind of man or woman do I want to become? And so this kind of practices is essential for the current behavior as well.
Right. So I have two more questions about the reforms, strictly just about the reforms. I didn't notice, maybe people at home don't know that Estonia has a very corporate tax-friendly system where really businesses and corporations are not taxed unless they withdraw funds from a business. As long as they reinvest any earnings or any profits, they will not have to pay any taxes. What I didn't know is that the seed was actually planted in Lithuania with regard to this reform, and that Estonia did a similar reform afterwards. So can you tell a little bit of how this idea was born of not taxing businesses unless they actually extract resources from their very business?
Yeah, after our money became sound, we naturally moved to private pensions and taxation system. And we were just brainstorming what would be a sound tax model. Of course, first of all, we came up to an idea it has to be no flat tax, no progressivity. But when looking at the corporations, we found out that it's not wise to tax profits if they are reinvested in the company. And we designed the model explaining that profits should be only, if profits are taxed, they should only be taxed at the time when they are allocated as dividends to the shareholders. And we published a publication, so it's all recorded, and there was a big conference, and the Prime Minister participated in this conference, and he got the idea. And as a result, Lithuania had a zero tax rate on all reinvested profit. Pay attention, it was not the change of the model, because the pure deferred tax model means that fiscal and financial accounting actually merges. So there is no need, to have fiscal allowances and so on. You just have normal financial accounting, which is very transparent, which makes the life of a company, enormously changed. But in Lithuania at that time, in 1997, we had zero rate on all reinvested profit, and this model lasted for 5 years. And Lithuanian companies, of course, were hurrying to invest, and it was really a revolution in our technological level, a huge advancement of our industries. And it was very unfortunate that in 2002, Lithuania returned to traditional model. And from that time on, always, every year, some politicians would suggest some kind of tax benefits, because they understand that companies need to invest. The investment is sound when it is done by someone who owns the profit, who knows exactly which technology will bring, a rise to the company's profit, which new department is needed. If you take this money to the budget and then you give subsidies to the companies, of course the efficiency of this investment is incomparably lower. So politicians got this feeling, and there was always, some tax benefits. We still have them. And I was very happy that Estonians learned about our model, and they introduced it in 2000. So it's already proved its soundness, its fruitfulness. Latvians introduced the same model in 2018. And 2020, Poland also allowed companies voluntarily, if they want, to switch to the same model, which means that, sound ideas, they conquer minds. So for me, it's very important, especially with the global minimum profit tax, very important that this model was defended. Today, it's a legitimate model, even in OECD and EU directive. So any country can still go to this model out of traditional profit tax. Of course, the only trouble would be that the companies who are now eligible for minimum profit tax, they would have, a bunch of regulations, but they come just because of those global agreements.
It is funny how a small country as Lithuania is a fertile ground for reform elsewhere as a way of experiments. So going back to the currency board, I think there's like two main points of importance with a currency reform. First of all, getting government out of using the printing press and using their currency to pay for their own spending, and secondly, a stable currency. So having in mind those two objectives or goals, keeping government finance honest in the sense that if they want to spend more, they will have to get higher taxes or use debt, which is of course not a very good way of doing things, but they cannot use the central bank or their own currency to finance government spending, and the other is a stable currency. So how did you go about these reforms, and why do you think the currency board was the right solution to both aims?
Yeah, currency board was really a great solution. Because when we introduced national currency in 1993, the central bank became started interventionist policies. And they started very restrictionary policy. They wanted to stop inflation. But as a result, national currency became twice as expensive. National currency became twice as expensive vis-a-vis dollar just in a month. So imagine all businesses were cut from air because all calculations in business were in dollars. And if you import something and you sell it and suddenly you earn twice less than you expected, so it was a huge damage to the economy. And me personally, I was especially touched by the central banker teaching the society, now this is the market economy. Please learn how to operate in the market economy. I was, ready to scream. This is not market economy. This is an interventionist central bank. You sit on the bunch of powers and money, and you intervene into the market, and you say to people that this is now the new market economy. Come on, you're the same as Soviet Gosplan, which is, the Central Planning Committee. So that's why the Free Market Institute went very proactively explaining that there is a solution. People could be saved from these fluctuations. Even there was a shortage of liters of national currency in the exchange offices because Pope John Paul II was visiting Lithuania Huge crowds of Polish pilgrims came to the country. Everyone needed national currency. And suddenly in the exchange office, you cannot even buy national currency because of the restrictive policies of the central bank. So it was very good context to suggest that there is a solution. And the prime minister, who was a businessman, he understood that it is a smart solution, and so they introduced it. And paradoxically, just a year after, there was a big banking crisis. But the government could not pay for the losses of the bank. So, money were not taken from people's pockets to pay for the banks. Then in 1998, there was a treasury almost crisis. And again, if not for the currency board, of course, money would be printed to help the government. Again, we had to survive it. But the trouble was that most economists in the country were not supporting the currency board. They were so eager to go to the classical central bank to operate all the powers. But after the crisis happened in Russia, and we had big turmoil for our exporting industries and so on.
It's 98, no?
98, 99. Then those economists understood that the currency board actually is protecting us, and even the enemies changed their mind publicly, which was very important for us. They changed their mind publicly, and there was more or less national consent that we will not touch the currency board anymore, because before it was always like, let's dismantle it, let's help our exporters, because it's true, it's not easy to export with the appreciating currency. Dollar was appreciating vis-a-vis Deutschmark. Then we pegged our currency to euro with the association agreement, and euro started to appreciate vis-a-vis dollar. So we had always appreciating currency. Still, our exporting industries were, very, very efficient. And today, Lithuania is one of the wealthiest of the all former socialist countries. We are very close to Czech Republic, and like southern countries like Portugal, Greece, and so on. If we calculate by purchasing power, we are above them.
Right. In a matter of 20, 25, maybe
Yes.
30 years.
Yes.
That's incredible. So that's the reforms in Lithuania, and then you started dedicating your life to other things, maybe a novel, but also to a more philosophical analysis of the underpinnings of free market thought. So we've discussed the term scarcity, and how scarcity is a very important concept that we economists, and I also speak from on my own behalf, tend to take for granted a lot. No, we don't talk much about scarcity outside economics in other fields like political science, like in other types of fields, but also as a motivating force for change and advancement and human betterment. Can you comment on how you got to this kind of research, and why should we all think about this concept of scarcity in a more profound way?
Resigned from my active position in 2001 and started to write a novel. And also I was considering why people, at the end of the reforms, why people started to despise some of the features of monetary system. Like they wanted to have more money, and we insisted that sound money is a scarce money. And my hypothesis was that people do not think that. My hypothesis was that in reality people do not despise economy, but they despise something which is behind economic way of thinking, economic way of acting, which is scarcity. Scarcity not only of resources, but our own human limits, our own human condition. And so I started this journey, the intellectual journey and spiritual journey, to challenge something which economists do not challenge in their everyday life. And in 2015, we brought a group of scholars, 20 scholars from different disciplines: philosophy, theology, anthropology, psychology, history, of course also economics, to find out what does humanity know about something which is not complete, something which is not perfect, something which is not enough. And the studies revealed that scarcity, or rather we called it lack later on, is a universal principle, the third principle of every becoming, together with form and matter, something which is non-existent but potential of existence is essential for form and matter to coincide and to create change, to be an element of becoming and of being. There is no being without becoming. So when we understood that it is such a really fundamental principle, we also could come back to economic life and see that economic scarcity is just as one aspect, one reflection of the universal scarcity. But in economic life, you cannot hide yourself from scarcity because resources are scarce. We have to measure. We need money, right? We need exchange. So in economic domain, scarcity was manifested to humanity most of all. And therefore, some people call it the dismal science, economics as a dismal science. But imperfection is everywhere. But our studies found out that it is not a curse. It is a blessing because since the world is not finished, it's not completed, there is always room for advancement. We, as a creative people, can only act freely because the world is not perfected. Not all trees have been planted, not all the universities have been founded, not all the books have been written, not all the research has been completed. So this imperfection is actually, our call for liberty, our space for acting, also for our community. If I was not lacking another one, there would be no friendship, no love, no family, nothing. So it was really a wonderful journey. And today we are happy to be back also to economic domain.
I think you commented on this, that if you take like economic scarcity and like subsidies, like poor subsidies, let's give people money or food, and it resolves one side of scarcity, but not the other sides of scarcity. We might get food on the table, but there's then other types of scarcity in social relations. Can you comment on that?
Yes. One of my insights, which was not documented yet in the studies, was that lack is a constant in a human life. Only the aspects of lack are changing. And being a limited creature, I cannot respond to all the lacks in my life. I always have some priorities. So my priorities actually define what was the biggest challenge, the biggest shortage in my life. If it's love, I was looking for love. It's health, I would seek healing from doctors. If it's money, I would be working. And everywhere we need some new capacities, If I want to be a mother of a family, I need some new features, right? If I want to become a scholar, I need to read some books which were not on my table before. So everywhere it requires efforts. It requires some new knowledge, new capacity, new people to meet, new community to form around new aims. So if someone intervenes and responds to my priority lack, like for most people it would be material lack, the lack will not disappear from my life. It will shift to the lack of community. Look, in the morning I don't have to go out to work I lack friends, I lack colleagues, then I lack meaning by the end of the day. I think, it would be better to have some meaning for the day than to have bread on my table. So this existential lack could be much more damaging to a human being. And therefore, I think it's an important warning from our studies. Be careful with the welfare policies, because they can shift lacks to the aspects of life which are much more difficult to handle. I mean, it's easy to produce something and to earn for bread. There is no unemployment almost everywhere now because of the monetary policies, but that's another topic. So yes, lack is fundamental. It's always with us, but it's a liberating message. It's a liberating message because now I'm not wounded by imperfection in my friend, by imperfection in my colleague, by imperfection of the world. I see it as a possibility to advance. I'm not, always unhappy about myself because, wow, I see I can develop this feature. I can learn something more. So this is very liberating. And of course, when we relate it to political life, it's very important because it shows that if people are not aware of scarcity as a basic principle, politicians will always jump in to say, I will resolve your scarcity, and the more we delegate to the politicians, the less capacity we have as a human beings, as a community, to respond, to address. And in the world of the calamities, we need to be, on duty. We need to be able to respond to new challenges. So centralizing this response to scarcity in a power is probably the biggest danger of the civilization.
Those are very interesting points. So this has been a very pleasant conversation. Elena, maybe just to wrap up, a last question. This is not your first time in Guatemala. Do you have any other message that you want to share with our audience in Guatemala or Latin America on freedom, on scarcity, on economic reform? Any other thing that you would like to emphasize?
I really admire Guatemala and Central Latin America in general, and people are so entrepreneurial, people work hard. So if we accept the need to have more sound institutions for private production, exchange, cooperation, people could advance their lives much better. Not only material lives, but also the other side of our life, the spiritual life, the life of intellectual adventure. And I think really a lot of hope I see in Central and Latin America. And I wish that the good examples coming from our small countries, which suffered from socialist, communist times, and which now have to share this immunity. We have to share this immunity with you. Don't follow the communist illusions. Don't follow communist utopias. Go where free people can freely produce, exchange, and live in peace, because living in peace is a very important feature of being on the free market.
We need a little bit more Lithuania and Guatemala, perhaps, but thank you for Elena for being here with us in this interview. Thank you as well, and have a great time at UFM tomorrow as well, and when you receive your honorary doctorate. We're very honored to have you here.
Thank you so much.